So we're going to jump into a little show and tell pretty quickly, but really just a title to sort of set this. So unified approach to clouds, containers, and PaaS services. Unpack that for a second before I do pull up the show and tell. I think that we set a pretty interesting stage with a lot of details. Really what we're hearing though is we're hearing an orchestration story, which is pretty important. It's especially important in a private cloud scenario because that's what needs to happen in order to take on-prem infrastructure and offer it up in a cloud-like fashion. It's also still an interesting problem in the public cloud too. Public cloud does a lot of orchestration for you, so it sort of offloads a lot of that work. When I say I want a DynamoDB, there are things happening that are totally abstracted away from me, and that's what I'm paying for, and that's what I get. But when we look at the big enterprise, there's still lots of orchestration that's happening. They still don't necessarily solve the problem of true self-service though. And that's where Morpheus does come into a nice play, is we say, hey, we're going to give you a way to provide gated access to creating self-service of all these things. Now, one of the things that we have seen happen, so when we think about cloudifying things, what the public cloud, what the private cloud might offer to us, and Estes, he went through this very nicely as the service layer, the service catalog, the things that I might need to go request. Databases, it could be networking constructs, and then one of the ones that has come to the fore in the last couple of years has been Kubernetes clusters, and this question was brought up here. So what we have done is we've spent a lot of time thinking, how do we offer that too? How do we offer self-service, not just in the public cloud, but in the private cloud too, and then do what we do really well, do all of the orchestration efforts needed to happen there. And what else can we do for it? So Kubernetes, and when we started ideating and thinking down the path, we said we want to allow for self-service of clusters. That's number one, building clusters. We have seen a lot of organizations move to a new model, a new attitude around clusters. So it's instead of setting up massive multi-tenanted clusters, there's this desire, and there's something that the cloud offers, which is that I can get clusters when I need them, and I can think of them more ephemerally. I don't need to think of them as monolithic and in traditional waterfall ops sort of mentality. I can think of them as an agile component of, or an agile platform that's a component of my application. So we wanted to do that, and we call that our build pillar. So we came up with a cluster area. This is a little bit different than our typical self-service area. It is really just a cluster's focus. We do have several different types that we allow you access to provision, and these are the cloud natives, AKS, EKS, GKE, soon to be added. You can even attach it to an existing cluster to get into our management facility, which I'll talk about next. And you can also provision our Kubernetes clusters. The magic of this is that we are not opinionated on what it is that you bring to the table. Just like what David showed, service catalog around what we call groups or project teams that allows you to build these for whatever cloud you want to put it in. Give it a name and proceed through the wizard. On the next page, I have a choice of layouts. So this is where we're not opinionated, because you can actually write your own layouts. So we can have operations teams who say, you know what, we like our Kubernetes clusters to be provisioned using KubeSpray or something else, or maybe it's another vendor. Or you can use the Morpheus provided one, which is named MKS here. Sort of a Morpheus Kubernetes service, a code name that we toy with, right? Right here, you see that there are three options. We do have 1.17, we have HA layouts, we have more at our disposal. And then you have that ability to drive service plan sizes down to your customers as well. So this is an ephemeral cluster that they can spin up into the cloud of choice. It is limited by all of those governance and role-based access elements that we talked about before. And just like we talked about before too, Morpheus is going to do all of the orchestration needed, whether it's getting IPs from IPAM, DNSing and DNS, load balancing, backups, and on. But we're driving this into the hands of the end user. Once it's up running, or Morpheus has been attached to an existing Kubernetes cluster. Though is the sort of the second pillar where we thought through and we said, what more can we do for this? Spinning up clusters is cool and very useful, but how can we also help teams operationalize or administer across this new complex technology that everybody's wanting to take advantage of? So inside of the cluster itself, you'll see a new facility of management utilities across here. So of course, visibility, just like we can across any service that we're managing. You have all of your metrics, memory, storage, network, and CPU. If you go and look at the nodes themselves and you drill into these, you will find all of the granular metrics that you would have over a traditional host or a traditional VM, I should say. All of the metadata that you want to have across it. But back in the cluster page itself, I now have all of the Kubernetes objects that have been inventoried and are right here front and center for me to work with, including a little inspection about the metadata and the config, even as raw, if I want to go copy this down and put this into SCM. And one of my favorite new tools is that I can edit the spec right here. So I can provide sort of an in-browser IDE-like experience out to administrative teams. This has been enormously beneficial for some of our large enterprises where we go in and we say, what cluster architectures do you have? And they say, well, we have one of everything. We have teams over here with Rancher, some over here with OpenShift. There's teams over here using their own vanilla version of open source Kubernetes. And we're trying to wrap our arms around all of it. Morpheus is great for that. We can give them a single pane of glass to get visibility and administrative access. We do the same thing across all of the constructs we find, whether they're workload related, network related, storage related, and on. We even give you the kube control binary right inside of here and the ability to run across specified namespaces, arbitrary commands. Oops, should not have done that one. Even templates with YAML, sourcing from URLs, or spec templates themselves that are in our library. So you can allow people to take advantage of that management suite. The other thing we've done is we've consolidated logging from the cluster as well as the cluster applications inside of our observability suite. So very metrics oriented logs and our OS monitoring metrics, but we want to give people that capability of understanding what's going on at every level we can. Last but certainly not least from the management pillar is sort of ongoing actions that you might take, which could be, API token or kubeconfig sharing if you need to provide access to other teams, or even scaling. And we do have customers who are taking advantage of our ability to add workers easily because of the orchestration that we do at that hypervisor or cloud layer, and even use event-driven observability frameworks to call back to Morpheus to create auto-scaling if they want to.
Quick question on that front.
Yeah, for sure.
So resource management can be a challenge in the Kubernetes world. You mentioned how the product addresses that by adding nodes. Stepping back from that, from a resource provisioning and placement perspective, how does your product help optimize the environment up until the point of adding an additional node?
So if we're talking Kubernetes specifically, so we're talking about optimizing the existing nodes. I think that more it's going to be observability. Kubernetes as an orchestrator is going to have built into its ability to be aware of the environment and place, say, pods in the appropriate places. We're not necessarily creating like an opinion on, say, affinity or quotas. We are giving people access to do that. That's in all of these, right? So I, depending on the right button, I can go in here and I can create those sort of quotas, or I can edit the node so I can create taints, tolerations, and affinity. So we're really looking at it more holistically from an infrastructure layer when we talk about scaling rather than inside the cluster itself. We think of the software that Kubernetes is as better for that job that it's doing than we could be to do its job as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
So how does something like Morpheus interface with vSphere Tanzu or VCF Tanzu and that sort of stuff? I mean, would they coexist, or is one calling the other, or how does that play out?
So they can totally coexist. And you're asking after what I would call a more complex solution scenario. So they might not want to take full advantage of all that Morpheus has to offer around Kubernetes. But this management pane especially can still really help if they're trying to provide administration at scale. So if they've got several TKG clusters or even one, and their operations teams are used to using Morpheus to come and operationalize a lot of their daily work, this is just a simple and easy place for them to go manage some of those constructs and abstractions here as well. And we have seen that in a lot of our customers. They're totally happy to have them coexist.
And deployment kinds of things. I mean, there's lots of other ancillary packages, so CSI, Trident, those sorts of things. And do you provide those sorts of capabilities integrated as well, or?
Yeah, so I'll step over here. I had a failed cluster. I didn't want to use this one for the demo, but because this one was built on our 1.20, you do see a new element here that's called packages. And essentially what we have is a service catalog of packages that you can go apply. So we want to give you this framework for managing the cluster itself. I don't want to tell you that you shouldn't use vendor X, right? In the case of, like, say, Tanzu that you brought up. But if you do elect to go down the road of MKS, just know that you now have an extremely extensible and capable platform for building your operational platform for your developers. And we're going to make it extremely easy for you to do that with.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And do you also manage multiple cluster management in parallel? I mean, you apply a policy and then the cluster update to the latest version of Kubernetes, for example, and things like that, without too much, activity from the administrator.
Yeah, so that is a focus on our roadmap, is how can we do things at across a multitude of clusters, with single button clicks. Right now it is each cluster, they're all inside of Morpheus, but each cluster is its own object. You could do that today with the API. So just making it a little bit more extensible in the traditional user interface is definitely an objective of ours.
Yeah, just one quick question, and maybe that comes up later. So how do you position yourself in terms of licensing, right? I mean, it's great to have it all one pane of glass and all that. I don't know if you're going to talk about it later or not in this demo, but I would be curious to hear, how do you license your product?
Everything $1 million, if you ask me.
Bags of cash sent to Adam. No, so because we touch so many underlying platform technologies, right? Bare metal, VM-based, PaaS, Kubernetes, we've normalized on a unit of measure we call a workload element, but it's really an application service, right? So how many VMs do you have in the case of a VMware, right? And Kubernetes would be, stateful sets, pods, in the case of PaaS, it'd be, X many DynamoDB instances. So we have that normalizing factor, and we'll license for the total number of those workloads that we're managing at any given time.
So one of the slides that Brett walked through, being able to have all of the sort of various aspects of workloads in a single platform. And so one of the things, just as an example, walk through with the capability of the platform is, let's say, developer request an application stack. Morpheus then goes and deploys the application. So in this case, it's a Golang backend and a MongoDB database. The Golang backend is running in Kubernetes, being deployed to a Kubernetes namespace. And then on the vSphere side, a virtual machine is being spun up with MongoDB database. So in this case, on the vSphere side, we're leveraging an Ansible playbook to actually perform the automation and configuration of that system. For me, that's one of the big benefits of what we can do from a unified platform perspective, is we've got all the capabilities to perform the automation orchestration of those VM-based workloads, and to tap into what is there from a Kubernetes perspective. Starting to see a lot of players in the market looking at how can I spin up and provision virtual machines utilizing Kubernetes and have them sort of in a unified model. For us, I think our big benefit is we live, breathe, and sleep spinning up virtual machines and the automation and orchestration associated with that. So in this case, when we start talking about tying on automation to the back of that, I could have Morpheus call out to HashiCorp Vault to configure dynamic credentials setup with the MongoDB database. So when we start talking about governance and having security and compliance automatically done as part of the request process, that's where we start to look at that capability. And so then at that point, the developer then requests dynamic credentials from HashiCorp Vault and then is able to access the MongoDB database. So for me, this is a great example of the capability the platform has to unify both containerization and Kubernetes, as well as what we've now termed as legacy workloads, and bring them closer together.